Joined in the studio this morning by Jeremy Dalley. He's a physician assistant from Trip Family Medicine here in Twin Falls, which is located on Fillmore Street. That would be directly across from the main post office on the north side of the city. They have a slogan, "Life's too short not to feel good." So I'm going to get all this out of the way early, Jeremy.
Let's do it.
Yes. And Dr. Tripp sent me a wonderful outline for today, but he couldn't make it. So you're stepping in, and you may have a different outline as of 15 minutes ago.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure what his outline was about, but one thing that I wanted to talk about today, it's been just something I've been working on and researching for the last little while. And in fact, I just got done with a 3-week, I guess, trial of this particular diet. It's called the ketogenic diet. And it's something I've been interested in. I've done a lot of reading about it and heard a lot about it. And I want to talk about some of the specifics of a ketogenic diet and talk a little bit about carbohydrates and kind of understanding why we should eat certain ways and maybe why certain diets are a little bit better than others and certain food types are better than others.
Is it in any way related to Atkins? Because people that I worked with that used to undergo Atkins would tell me that their body would enter a period after a week of ketosis. So
hmm
similar root word involved there.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of similarities there. So, namely, ketosis is when someone isn't using glucose as much for energy production at some point, and that's the main source of energy in the body, right, is glucose. And glucose is a good thing, but too much glucose tends to be problematic in our diet if we eat a lot of foods that break down to glucose really quickly. So things like, really processed flours or sugars or, foods that tend to taste really good, right? Really sweet. Those foods break down to sugar really quickly in our body, and that tends not to be a good thing. But, glucose itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, ketosis is basically when you have a lower amount of carbohydrate intake in your diet and your body looks to other sources for energy production. And ketones, so there's multiple ketones that your body uses. One's called acetoacetate, hydroxybutyrate, acetone. Your body can use those molecules to produce energy. And so, when people go into some form of ketosis, they switch from that energy production from glucose to using ketone bodies to make energy.
And then they start to see some weight loss.
Yeah, so the theory behind it is you're using fatty acids, so your fat stores are becoming your energy stores that usually they're not accessed unless we get into later stages of exercise. We initially use something called glycogen. It's a storage form of sugar in the body. It's stored in the liver, and or we use our circulating blood sugars, and that's what we use for energy. But until those are somewhat depleted, your body maintains a certain level of glucose. But until those are depleted, then we really don't use those fat stores as energy. So
When you mention what you're doing, though, we shouldn't maybe confuse it with Atkins, which is a diet very narrowly confined for a particular group of people. What you're talking about might be a diet that is likely for a larger proportion of the general public.
sure. Well, with the ketogenic diet, it's not really something that is recommended for everyone. It's not recommended long term, and really what I wanted to talk about more today was, I've had this experience with the ketogenic diet where for a 3-week period I consumed less than 20 uh, carbs a day, which is not a whole lot. If you consider that like an apple has about 25 carbs in it.
Hmm.
So you're eating a low amount of carbohydrates and your body's accessing these fatty acid stores. And I wanted to talk about some specific populations that maybe could benefit from it, and then talk more specifically about um, monitoring the carbohydrates that we take in our diet and some of the negative side effects associated with a high carbohydrate diet. So it's been an interesting experience. When you start out doing a ketogenic diet, you you don't realize a lot of times how many things you eat that have carbohydrates in them. and they're in most foods. So you're really looking at things like proteins and fats, and and I did eat a regular diet of things like vegetables because they tend to have a low amount of carbohydrate in them.
Depending on the vegetable too, right?
Yeah, depending on the vegetable. I mean, things like tomatoes, for instance, like a pretty good sized tomato is about five carbs. Or a cucumber is right about the same. So you're not getting a whole lot of sugar. You're getting dietary fiber from those, which doesn't increase your blood sugar levels. It helps with digestion, and you get a lot of nutrients from those foods, but you're not getting that big spike in blood sugar that makes your body, you know, basically feeds your body with that glucose.
We've got more on this topic coming up with Jeremy Dalley, physician assistant from Trip Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. It's 8:40. We're at 38. Bill Colley with you as well this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And as Jeremy said, what he's going to do in the next few minutes is really detail who this diet could benefit. So if you're one of those people out there like me who's got a history of dieting, this might be a segment that you don't want to miss. Jeremy Dalley joins us in studio this morning from Trip Family Medicine until 9 o'clock this morning. I do want to point out just after 9 o'clock news, Phyllis Beard is joining us from the Twin Falls County Fair, and she's going to be talking about anything potato, which is coming up in just a few days, and going to be inviting all of you to actually attend. 39 right now, and Bill Colley with you too on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Jeremy was talking about a diet that he's taking a look at, and who it might benefit. Now, you're not going to be eating a lot of bread on this diet, number one, right?
Certainly not. No.
And probably not a lot of starches.
Right.
So potatoes themselves might be limited.
Sure.
No rice.
Sure.
And then you mentioned certain things like an apple. If maybe you had half an apple, you could get away with it, but that would be your carbs for the day.
Sure. Sure. And really, I'm not necessarily, getting on the air to advocate people get out there and do a ketogenic diet all the time. Um, a ketogenic diet for some people is great. So the populations that we see, it's really beneficial for. So people who have epilepsy, that's initially why this diet was engineered. They found that people who ate these higher fat, lower carbohydrate diets, they saw less what's called neuroinflammation in those individuals. People who had been on all sorts of anti-epileptic medications and really had not a lot of success, they're put on these types of diets, and they saw that their need for medicine went down, the rate of seizure went down. So that's why this diet was initially developed. Now, what have we seen since then? Well, we've seen that people um, who struggle with things like mental health issues, um, there's quite a few different, and they were case studies that were written up in a few different peer-reviewed journals. Um, so there's a American Psychiatric Journal and a Psychology Journal that referenced a couple of individuals doing well on a ketogenic diet as far as reducing their need for certain antipsychotic medications and their overall functioning and improving with a ketogenic diet. So that's one population that we see could benefit from this. And I think something that probably applies to a broader amount of people here in the U.S. is individuals who fit the category of being insulin resistant. So pre-diabetes or diabetic patient, those patients can actually do well with these types of diets, a lower intake of carbohydrates.
Can it be permanent? That is, since you mentioned some of these people suffer from epilepsy and the like, is it a diet that you can, some diets, are very short term, but could you stay on ketogenic diet for a long period of time?
Yeah, and I think it's individualized. I mean, there's some people that probably would benefit from a long-term ketogenic diet, especially if you have epilepsy that's not well controlled with medication. Um, those who maybe suffer from some insulin resistance or have type 2 diabetes, they're good candidates for these types of diets. And the longevity of this diet really depends on the success that they have, and then for them to maybe transition to eating lower carbohydrate intake on a regular basis after they kind of achieve their goals, and their body makes some changes where they don't see as much insulin resistance, then yeah, it can be a great way um, to get people to that point. But as far as the long term, years, that remains to be seen. All the studies that I looked at, kind of, doing some research on this, the longest amount of time um, that I had read about was, let me find this particular study, um, was about a 24-week period. So, it wasn't an extremely long period. It was in an experimental and clinical cardiology journal write-up, and not a huge sample group. Um, but anecdotally in individual patients, we see that this can be a good thing. So I think the take-home point really is I want the listeners to think, well, what do I eat on a regular basis? What is it composed of? And a lot of times we worry about calories, and that's important. We can't eat as many calories as we want to. That's for sure. But the content of our diet is just as important as the calorie intake. Some people will, and I jokingly tell patients, like, you can lose weight if you eat, a certain number of calories of Twinkies, but do you think that that would be beneficial for your health long term?
Right. If that was all you were eating and you were only eating a certain level of them,
Hmm.
you're not getting any fiber or other important things in that diet.
Right, essential vitamins and nutrients that you would get through things like fruits and vegetables, and those things are good for you. Let's be honest; those things are not bad for you in any way. It's all about how much of those things are you eating. So I think really the things that we need to look at are processed flours, sugars. If we have a diet heavy in those, let's reevaluate those foods. Um, Things like even rice and potatoes, and these things are not bad foods. I don't want anyone to uh, misconceive that these are bad foods, but when we eat them, we usually eat a pretty healthy quantity of these foods. I should say an unhealthy quantity, a large amount of these foods in portion size, and that be, tends to be the problem. These really higher carbohydrate diets tend to promote things like diabetes, and actually we see that sugar tends to be at a bigger fault when it comes to your bad cholesterol, the LDL, and your total cholesterol and your triglycerides, when you're looking at a lipid panel.
Well, you mentioned that. If you go to Five Guys and you order French fries, they essentially back the dump truck up to your table, and
Load them on.
you know, they, you could end up with a pound of French fries. You probably don't need a pound of French fries.
Probably not. Probably not. And honestly, when you look at those meals, you say, well, what in this meal is a carbohydrate? So, you know, and that's a good example. I'd gone there the other day, and I asked to get the hamburger. I got a lot of vegetables on it and things like that without the bun and no fries. I think that's maybe becoming more common because I went to a few places while I was doing this and made similar requests, and they were really good about accommodating. But you think you're getting quite a bit of carbohydrate from those buns, maybe 15 to 20 carbs per slice, depending on the size of the bun. Um, and then you're getting a large amount from those fries, like you said. You get into the bag and you're like, where's my hamburger? Where's my food? Oh, it's buried around, the pound of fries that's covering it up, and then we tend to just kind of eat mindlessly, and we eat large amount of carbohydrates, and our blood sugars just go sky high really quick. Is that a good way to eat? Certainly not.
I think I've been there only 4 times in my life, but each time I've walked out of there feeling I should have been rolled out because the quantity is so much. And so when you're doing this, I would imagine anybody who gets on board with most diets should be consulting. Now, eating less, you probably don't necessarily have to consult somebody in your office, but my gosh, if somebody's going to go on a diet that's a radical change from what they've been eating, should they maybe have a checkup first?
Yeah, certainly. Especially if you have a strong family history of things like high cholesterol or diabetes or high blood pressure. I mean, you want to consult with somebody if you haven't. Um, some people have a fair amount of know-how as far as taking care of their bodies and understanding what they need, but some people need a little bit more assistance, and like I said, diets like this maybe aren't for everyone. and certainly the lower carbohydrate intake I think is for everyone. I think everyone could do with looking at their meals and saying, do I need fries and a bun? Well, probably not. You can probably choose one or the other, and it doesn't have to be with fries to make it a complete meal. I mean, you can have a hamburger and be satisfied, and or you know the bun and maybe some fries, or a bunless hamburger and maybe some fries, and be satisfied. Feel like you've eaten enough food. Most of the time, you feel like you've overeaten once you left, like you said.
In fact, I don't, buy a lot of like bread, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
but I noticed that if you're in a restaurant, I don't want to say there's an old Seinfeld episode about the pushing the bread on the restaurant customers,
Mm-hmm.
and George's father says that's where they get you. They get you with the bread. In other words, they fill you up on that. But the bread generally comes along and it's very good. It's hot, and people will sit down and eat 3 or 4 rolls at a sitting, and maybe they could do with just the one,
Right.
if
Right.
that, or half of it.
Right. And you think most meals that come with several, like a bread roll and rice and or potatoes and some other carbohydrate, right? And so you're doubling up probably on what you should be having, so you don't have starch with the starch. So that's, I think, one thing to consider is trying to keep, a good rule of thumb is, could you keep your carbohydrate intake less than like 30 or 40 carbs per meal? I think that's a little bit more reasonable. So, maybe scaling back is a better option for a lot of people. And honestly, it's all about sustainability when it comes to making diet changes. Things like the ketogenic diet for a lot of people isn't sustainable. And honestly, if everyone ate that way in the world, we don't have enough resources for people to eat, you know, that much protein and fat on a regular basis.
I had a doctor tell me one time he made a fist. He said, "So, tell you what," he said, "you eat a potato," or he said, "or you have a bowl of rice," and he said, "about the size of my fist." He said, "Imagine that just being a big bowl of sugar that you've just ingested." But he was implying that perhaps my chemical makeup is different physiologically than others, and that I tend to turn that stuff into those sugars more so than most people would. Is there something to that?
Well, certainly, there's individuals that have a higher propensity to get things like type 2 diabetes, the adult onset diabetes, if you will. And yeah, I think there's some people that physiologically they're at a disadvantage when it comes to food. Some people, they honestly eat terrible. And I see it all the time in the office. They come in for a wellness exam and they have, you know, as far as their weight goes, it's within a healthy range. And you talk about their diet and, oh, I eat whatever I want. I eat milkshakes every night, and maybe in those individuals it doesn't equate to them being overweight, which societally we look at those things and say people that are thin are healthy, people that are overweight or obese are unhealthy. And that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of people that have good labs and are healthy and exercise and take care of themselves, and they may fit in the per the BMI scale, the overweight or obese category. So I think that's flawed thinking, definitely, that everything is based on weight.
Now, we've got a couple of minutes left. I know that the doctor had been mentioning a couple of upcoming peel parties for, for facial peels,
Mhm.
just to sort of give people an idea of what can be done. Are those filled yet?
So yes, so we have a peel party tomorrow. It's going to be in the afternoon, I think 2:30 to 7:30 or something like that. Um, and that one is full. Now we have another peel party coming up on November 9th, and I think we still have some remaining spots available for that. So we 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 have a few more spots that were available. Russ ended up having to be out of town for this particular peel party, so it'll be Dr. Tripp and I. But the next time there's going to be 30 spots available, so there'll be a little bit more time.
And they fill up fast, is
They do.
what I've noticed. And people have to make a reservation because you can't just walk in, because if it's full, there's not going to be any room.
Yeah, we like to make sure when we do these events that we spend enough time with each of the individuals, and we give them some good counseling, and they don't feel rushed in the process. So we want it to be an enjoyable experience for them and to come away feeling a little bit pampered. So
Well, they'll come back that way, right?
I think so.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, got about a minute to go. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about the diet as well?
Well, there's one last thing, and this was from that same article that I referenced. um, in the experimental and cardiology journal. So what they saw is individuals who adhered to a diet like this, who had higher cholesterol. So all of the individuals they looked at, they saw a decrease in their LDL, their bad cholesterol, increase in their HDL, and a decrease in their triglycerides. So basically, you know, forever and ever we've thought fat makes us unhealthy. That's not necessarily true. We're finding more and more that processed sugars and overabundance of carbohydrates in our diet are basically what's making us unhealthy. And we could stand to have those good fats in our diet. Now, should we be eating bacon all the time? No, certainly not. But there's a lot of good fats out there, and I think that the take-home message is really evaluate what you're eating every meal and make some small changes, something that you can sustain. Just eat a few less carbohydrates at every meal, and maybe you'll see some big differences in your weight or even your labs.
I saw the English writer Tom Rogan on a TV program not long ago. He's American, but he grew up in England, and he was asked what surprised him about coming back to the United States, and he said, "They said that Americans treat bacon like it's candy." Uh, we'll see you again soon, somewhere in the rotation.
Somewhere in the rotation, we'll see.
Jeremy Dalley joining us. He's a physician assistant from Trip Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. Coming up on 9 o'clock, we're going to be talking, speaking of potatoes, about anything potato at the Twin Falls County Fairgrounds coming up in just a few days. That's after 9 o'clock news from Fox.